Hi, I'm Jeff Zakarski,
And I'm Jason Primrose.
and welcome to Gentlemen, the number one podcast for open-hearted leadership. Um, Before we dive into today's episode, one of the new things that we're introducing is we don't want to keep all of the stuff that's supportive in our lives only to ourselves. And so every time we have an opportunity to share something that is being adapted to our life or being incorporated into our life, we want to share it so that we hope that our hopes is that something you hear here either at this part in the podcast or later in the conversation has a direct impact on your life. Um, so I'm trying to think what is something that's been really beneficial for me. Um,
In relation
I
to
think
accountability and responsibility.
in a relationship, yeah. So today's episode, thank you for saying that. Today's episode, responsibility and accountability. Um, the thing that I'll say that has been really beneficial for me that I've been using and actually just used earlier today is actually the simple practice of journaling. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot going on for any of us at any given moment in the day, for any conversation, for every situation. There's always what we're doing and in that present moment. And then there's all this other stuff that's going on that might not even be relevant to the situation at hand. For example, even getting onto this podcast today and knowing that there was stuff in my space from clients. I'm actually broadcasting this from my childhood home, and I'm in the den and got to kick my parents out of the house for about an hour. So getting them out of the house, like all of this stuff was in my space. And what I realized is it didn't have me be as present or connected and grounded to what we're really doing here, which is having this kind of conversation. So what I am able to do through journaling is actually get what's in my head out and allow it to just be the experience that I'm having. But as a result of it, I can, if I journal it, I think there's a lot of scientific data out there that says that, you know, pen to paper is actually a really, really effective tool for um, truly getting it on a cellular level that something is able to leave your body, whether it be a new idea or whether it actually just be something that's got you tongue tied, or just doesn't have you feel as grounded, doesn't have me feel as grounded. So I took on journaling and things that I wrote is like, hey, what are all the stories that I'm telling myself, or what's all the stuff that's just simply in my space that I'm too overwhelmed to identify individually. And so the collective, like cake batter, is all these ingredients totally meshed together, like emulsified into one, and I'm not able to separate them. So journaling allows me to actually do that. And then I'm calm and present and excited and able to tap in and be like really be here. That's the thing that I can distinguish. I can really be here from it.
Journaling. Yeah, I can see how, um, with all of the conversations going on in your head, that being able to just write out everything that's happening, everything that's coming toward you, at you, that's in you, is like access to freedom, like an access to that peace that you were talking about, that you think
Hmm.
or you relate to not ever having, being able to have. Um, so yeah, I think it's cool because to hear you say that, like, there are triggers that have you relate to not being able to have peace, but then you also have tools that allow you to reclaim
Hmm.
that what you want. I think is really important, to
Yeah.
just note for the audience, and also for you whenever
Mm.
your buzzies come, you have something. You have something. Um,
Yeah, and just through the topic of responsibility and accountability, all of that is my stuff, right? So I can sit here and think that, oh, well, if I'm actually responsible for how grounded I am at any given moment. I'm responsible for any narratives that are happening in the back of my head that might keep me from being connected to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the common ways that people avoid responsibility, which is, I know, one of the things that we're going to talk about today, but in avoiding responsibility, it's, oh, well, if somebody else would just change the way that they showed up, then everything would be fine on my end. And what that does is that relinquishes me um, of any individual responsibility, and actually puts me in a situation. I don't think a lot of people like to use this term, but I think I'm gonna actually say it because I think it's important. This idea of having a victim mentality, where you basically put the responsibility on somebody else, or it becomes a conversation about blame and fault, and and that just keeps me from actually being in my power, being with what my truth is, or actually sharing that. And but that's all in my responsibility. So I wanted to share that a little bit because I think that that's going to kick off part of this conversation, because I think people get responsibility confused with blame and this whole game, and it always means that somebody has to be wrong. And so it keeps like a very divisive
Mm-hmm.
conversation about how people are right, how people are wrong. And that's we saw this a lot in this last year, and not just this last year, about who's right and who's wrong about beliefs, about the presidency, about this, that, and the other thing. Like, everybody has these beliefs that they hold on to. um, and so I say all of this just to kind of to wrap it up with, we need to get responsible for our beliefs, because if we don't, then our beliefs will actually dictate how life actually goes, and we never actually get that freedom that you're talking about. Like, there's actually freedom in responsibility, which is, I think, uh, what you were hitting on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Um, okay, so I want to share that your tools a lot more vulnerable than mine. I was gonna mention family because
On which
one of
one?
my
Wait, what'd you say?
uh, I was gonna mention Planoly
Oh yeah, for
because
sure.
one of my responsibilities for our partnership is social media, and admittedly, it has been challenging to keep up with it in the capacity that I'm committed to. And we can talk about that because it's all part of it. But Planoly really helps because it allows me to upload any content that I want to share on for us, and create the captions and add the hashtags and all of that stuff, and then schedule it out like days, weeks in advance.
Mm.
Um, so it has been supportive in that, like, I can always turn to that platform as a place where, like, I already know, and then because I have access to that, I'm liable to like plan out what our feed looks like for the next however long, and then I can actually like listen back to the clips, and then react to them, in real time, like in the app, and then schedule them to go live. So, um, with that, I want to offer everyone the opportunity to find us anywhere: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Clubhouse, just by searching Gentlemen, 2 words, the podcast. And Jeff, you've already, like, I mean, we just, went to the deep end and dove right into accountability and responsibility. So, uh, I want to go back to the responsibility as access to freedom, and the distinction between blame and responsibility, and the I think what you were pointing to was this, the binary nature of someone being wrong. So it's
Mm.
either your fault or it's my fault, and in both of those dynamics are disempowering, um, because I guess it doesn't seem like there's a place for ownership in that conversation, and I think ownership is an important part of responsibility and accountability. So,
Mm. Hmm. Well, I think there's room for ownership. I think the gap is that nobody takes it. because
Yeah.
they're always waiting for the other person. It's like, oh, if it's your fault, you're waiting for someone else to take ownership.
Mm,
And if it's my fault, then somebody else might be waiting. But even me, like if I'm relating to it as, oh, it's my fault, I'm to blame here. If I don't own up to or take responsibility for whatever it is that I created, like the impact that I created or the action that I created, I'm still stuck in this place of being totally trapped by not taking responsibility because I'm still waiting for something outside of me to make it better, to take
mm,
the action, to create the result, to have the conversation, to like, to go, I mean, quite anything. Like, so yeah, ownership is not actually being had. But when ownership is taken on and removing the idea of um, blame, like if there is nothing to blame, then what's left? And it's like, oh, I could just, like, I'm human and like I did a thing or somebody else did a thing, like not getting people, like this is really jargony, but not getting people where they're at, which is like another way of saying like not accepting somebody for their like imperfections can be
mm.
another way of I've experienced as like waiting for somebody else to change or waiting for somebody else to show up differently. And then I can go live my life. And then I can have the peace in my relationship. Or I can take responsibility and create it, like take responsibility for my stories, take responsibility for my my own bullshit and actually
Yeah.
create peace in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, I had an interesting conversation with Tyler this morning about opportunity.
Okay.
And after our session, she said, "It sounds like you're an opportunity magnet." And I was like, "Huh? I kind of knew that, but I realized that I was relating to opportunity as a burden." And so I want to say this: opportunity is access to the life that I really want, that I want for myself. It's access to my vision, and I was relating to
Okay.
opportunity as a burden to the life that I
Mm.
have,
Hmm.
which isn't completely working.
Hmm.
And what I saw in that was taking responsibility for getting supported around the opportunities that are coming to me.
Hmm.
And um that was showing up in so many places. It was showing up in like my finances, it was showing up in my medical journey around so many things. I've had quite an interesting medical journey over the past couple of years. Um, but that all of these things that were showing up, breakdowns, opportunities, whatever, I think breakdowns are opportunities. So these
Hmm.
opportunities to like look deeper into these different facets, but actually taking responsibility for doing so, like actually, um, rather than blaming, like for example, the condition or my financial position or the other
Hmm.
person for asking me, to do whatever, and this creating this kind of like whirlwind, which we talked about, because because and I wasn't clear, but when I was describing what had shown up for me last week, I wasn't relating to the opportunity as that, as access, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's what you were hearing, and maybe we
Hmm.
didn't know it, but it was the belief that it was like burdensome to whatever I guess I was expecting to be like, which is like this consistency. Um, so I think for me, it's like the way responsibility and accountability has shown up recently is like being responsible for the shift that I want in my life, not having it come from somewhere else, and being responsible for like how I'm relating to what's showing up in my space, um,
Hmm.
and also being responsible for getting supported around what I really, really want. Um, yeah, and I think
Hmm.
when you get supported, that's where the accountability comes in.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, and I heard that part of it had to do with you getting real and checking in around what was actually going on and not just what was manifesting itself. Because I think
Mhm.
sometimes we focus on the like how the symptoms are manifesting, and that becomes the thing that we try to fix really
Mm-hmm.
quick. And so there's no actual responsibility in that because we're relating to this thing as broken. And if we really get responsible and we really take a step back and take a look, we can actually see how where we haven't been responsible or accountable to ourselves in some way, shape, or form, at some point it contributes to a situation or a circumstance or a conversation with anybody that um, is not exactly what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And but that's where we focus. We focus on this little pin of like, oh, this is the thing that isn't what I want. Let's look at this. But in terms of speaking from opportunity, um, if we look backwards, we can actually understand what we might have been able to do differently. And in this case, I'm hearing you say, well, if I actually relate to opportunities different, or if I get supported differently, then this thing that I don't like, this thing that is actually not serving me won't show up
Mm-hmm.
because I'm being responsible and I'm being accountable to myself, to my vision, and um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And I think one thing that I felt was like that's something that happened like with our partnership is the idea of responsibility and accountability for like the different roles that we have in the inside of the podcast. And I noticed, and I didn't realize this until last week. So I noticed how it was relating to the request that you made on Friday. And I realized that I had created a story in my head that like if I don't ask for support with what I need support with, then Jeff shouldn't ask for support with what he needs support with. And I actually
Mm,
create that same idea with other dynamics with other people. But it's
mm,
actually inside of me not
mm-hmm,
asking for support. It has nothing to do with the other person, what they're doing or
mm,
not doing or what they need. It's that it's me not being responsible for the ways I need to be supported and actually then going out and taking that responsibility and acting on it. um
mm,
so I just want to say that like I had recorded that voice message like 4 times and I was like I don't like who I'm being right now, like, but I didn't know what it was. And then literally last night I was like, oh, I get it, because there's things for me to own that I haven't been able to keep up with,
mm,
in terms of like what we're working on, and I also haven't asked support with those things. So it's like,
mm,
well, just because I haven't doesn't mean that Jeff can't. Like he's
mm,
obviously very clear on what he wants to happen, his vision for for our partnership, and making sure that we're in communication about that. And so yeah,
mm.
so that's what it was very interesting. I was like,
Nice.
oh yeah, I see that. Okay, awesome.
Uh,
This is good
I
stuff.
love that. I love that. Just two guys talking about this right here. It's like this idea of like being mad that you're not getting supported, but also like not asking for the support that you need. And I think
Mm-hmm.
like the thing that I want to just point to is like we can laugh about it here because we're in this side of the conversation right now, but like I will own it like as a man, like asking for support or like knowing what I need, being willing to identify it, being able to ask somebody else or being willing to ask another man for support
Mm-hmm.
has like historically not really been a big part of my life, other than the last, few years, as I've
Mm-hmm.
been learning it, what that looks like for me to take on that. And, and I say that because as being part of being a gentleman is being vulnerable enough and courageous enough, like listening to the last episode, being actually courageous and vulnerable enough to be willing to put yourself out there. I, it's pretty common throughout the world that men just they have this lone wolf mentality. Like I can take it on, I can do it all myself because I learned that from somebody somewhere at some time, and that just became the normal. Like I think about like having a conversation with my dad and like the idea of me asking for support for him, like actually asking for support. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I've ever seen that man talk for like look for support. And no fault on his side by any means, but he learned that like just got to do everything. Like I don't actually know how to ask for help or ask for support, and that's where I learned it. So the thing that I want to just reiterate is it's it can be looked at as generational, um, in the way that it gets passed down, and also I think that it's not just simply generational, but it's just simply who you spend your time with. You know, if your dad wasn't around, like who did you spend time with? Where did you learn that from? And I'm curious, Jason, for you, like the thing that you just shared, and one, thank you for sharing it as openly as you did. Um, where did you pick that up?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, then you said generational. I mean, we have to go to like socioeconomics, and we have to go to racial dynamics
Mm,
and the systemics around, um, what I guess what I mean, responsibility as a concept in the Black community is just it's a whole nother level of like, I guess, trauma and complication. But um, because, growing up with a single mother, she felt responsible for everything. So like I watched my mom work multiple jobs, and I mean we have like a matriarchy very much of a family, so they support each other in the ways that they can. Um, whether it be time like watching us or something like that, but like my mom working three jobs and putting food on the table and feeling like she needed to do it all. Um, and then having a father who for a long time didn't want to take responsibility for the fact that I existed, that I was like his son, and that mostly financially. um, and having a stepfather and a stepmother that felt responsible for me but didn't know necessarily, I think, what to do with that responsibility on some cases, or some cases maybe felt overly responsible for um, my upbringing. And then all of that inside of like financial hardship and, medical neglect, um, and those types of things. So it's something Tyler made aware of me, that there was a lot of conditioning inside of it. And so for me to take this level of radical responsibility for my life and how I want it to go is actually an undoing of like, on so many levels, generational like trauma. And it sounds like we have something similar there. And I'm sure that my grandfather was like this, and my grandmother, and going back and back, because there weren't a lot of places to turn. And I think it's especially in communities where like it's disproportionate in terms of like wealth. Even like my mom, for example, was disproportionately, she's better educated or more educated than some of our other family members, so she generally made more money. So it's like when she looks around, like where can she be supported financially, or where can she be supported in level of time, and when everyone is kind of in a similar situation that's in her ecosystem and in her sphere. So it's like, well, we both have three kids and we're both single moms, so who of us can support the other, in these types of ways. So it's very interesting that you brought that up, because that's something that I
mm,
wasn't quite clear on, and Tyler brought it to me, and I was like, wow. But it did lead me to the shift, because I became very aware of, um, I guess I started to see more clearly like the ways that my mom did take responsibility and did look at opportunity a certain way, um, and the opportunity that I have to again, um, have my life go how I want it to, and doesn't have to necessarily be what it's been or what it's looked like for other people. Yeah.
mm, mhm. Yeah. So I think I think that there's something actually really important in this conversation. So one, again, Shane, thanks for the vulnerability around it because I get that in some sense, like there's some similarities between both of us, right? Like a straight white man and like a homosexual African American man, right? Like the difference in upbringings is very, very different. And I'm continuing to do my own work around what is it that I get to own as being like just simply having access to what I have. And um, I I applaud you for sharing everything that you just did. And I'm curious. I think the question on my mind is like, as a general role of humanity, what do you think is really in the way of people um, stepping up and wanting to take on the type of shifts that you are taking on for yourself?
Hmm. I think it's a few things. I think it's a little bit of like programming and narrative.
Hmm.
I think it's like creating an ecosystem where people don't feel like they need to take responsibility. Like they don't need to
Mm.
take ownership. They can just blame something else.
Okay.
Um, I think that communication is one thing. So the types of conversations that we're having with each other and ourselves. I think the fear of looking at what's there, and I think this is not just again, this is like not just from the Black community. I'm talking about like overall um,
100%.
fear of looking at what's there,
Hmm.
and um, and uh, and then compassion for that same thing, what's there, because we get to hold space for like what is systemic, um,
Hmm.
and also hold space for like the awareness and the processing and choosing something different inside of the oppression. And so I think that the path to liberation and I think the path to liberation is through responsibility and accountability for everyone. Um, and and I said this in Instagram one time, and it was we were talking about like white supremacy as a system, and
Hmm.
um, and it's that no one gets to be themselves in it because we're always, I guess, aspiring to something that like is more of a construct that isn't actually the fundamental core of like what who people are, who we are as humans, as people. Um, and in that I noted like there's a lot of men and women that I know that aren't BIPOC or aren't of color that feel feel constricted and play into these certain roles or norms or like um, molds because the system doesn't allow for us to be ourselves. That somehow is damaging to the the infrastructure. Uh, so that's, I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
and I think we all get to be responsible for that, right?
Yeah. Well, and um, that takes me to this quote that I've heard several people say. Somebody's going to be joining us a little bit later in the season is 100% is easy and 99% is a bitch. Like taking 100 like responsibility and like the idea of um, me like the way that I see that from my own perspective is that um, it's when it comes around to like race and systemic oppression and all of that stuff is like if I'm not willing to be responsible if I'm not willing to take responsibility, then at some level, like somebody else is to blame, some structure is something outside of me. Like I'm just waiting for something to maybe someday shift. But what I know is like who I am in this world is somebody that is somebody that like stands for all humans and the equality and the destruction of that. And I can't do that by taking 99% of
Mhm.
accountability. Like I can't just say, oh, it's on this person. There's this person of color to like do stuff. Like yes, there's like the idea of being able to take responsibility outside of that construct, but
Mhm.
me ignoring that it does, me ignoring that it exists to begin with, is me not being accountable to who I am as a person. Did
Yeah.
that make sense? I'm not.
Yeah.
Did that land? I want to
Yeah.
make sure.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it reminds me of something that one of our transformation buddies said about a conversation she had that was difficult around race. And, two things can be true at the same time. And so someone can have come from maybe a family that wasn't quite as set up financially, build themselves up by their bootstraps, and now be on the other side of that and be successful. And
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily take away the fact that like someone of color may not have been able to do that, or that disproportionately people of color haven't been able to do that. Um, when you were talking about this responsibility for, it's this it's the difficulty in taking responsibility for, um like what I got clear on in the last year was taking responsibility for my role in encouraging or advancing white supremacy, right? And that has been um, in work relationships. I think it's shown up in my romantic relationships. I think it's shown up in, um, it showed up in my writing where I wasn't quite clear on what it meant to like see myself, um, and taking responsibility for my relationship to whiteness, and at the
Hmm.
same time taking responsibility for my relationship to blackness and my second and being a member of the LGBTQ plus and my gayness. Like what taking responsibility for all of those things uh, actually changes like how I am in those conversations. Because if I'm not taking responsibility for my relationship to like my blackness and my gayness, that might have me show up in a conversation where I don't own and I defend or speak up on those things.
Totally.
And not being responsible for my relationship to whiteness would mean that
Hmm.
I would actually actively ignore the fact that I'm not speaking up about. So it's been a very interesting, um, path for me, and just to bring it all home is that, um, all of that taking responsibility, all of that's connected. So my responsibility to my blackness, my gayness, my relationship with my family, my responsibility for what I've seen growing up, and then my responsibility to make a different choice, all inside of this kind of like systemic, um, ecosystem that we live in. Uh, it's a lot. It's a lot. Um, and so I don't want to discount the fact that like I come from a privileged background and I have privileged circumstances. And so there are people that may want to take on this work or this level of responsibility, and it's just feels insurmountable. And so maybe the amount of support that's needed is greater. Um, and so that's the part that I think we all get to take responsibility for, is that people have different levels of support and needs. And so what might be normal or sustainable for you and I could be completely different for someone that
Hmm.
is, in a greater level of marginalization or,
Hmm.
invisibility or something like that. So,
Yeah. Well, and I get that. you know, there's two sides of it. It's like one, knowing what's available or what could be available, and in some cases, based on your environment, your ecosystem, what seems possible from the place where you're standing, it looks differently from somebody else that's standing in a different spot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it doesn't mean that it doesn't take something to get to the next level from wherever you are. But if you're starting from a place where you're marginalized, if you're starting from a place where you're oppressed, if you're starting from a place where the shield or the sphere of possibility or what you've been exposed to is different, then I don't know if I want to say it's harder per se, but it's a much more difficult starting point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the point that I'm looking at. Like, it still may take energy and all of that kind of stuff, but like, you also, when you don't know what you don't know, how do you create and take action, towards something? And that takes something. It's like, our fears keep us in the way of taking that. And when that's been your outlook and that's been your experience, and then
Mm-hmm.
that if you like, okay, like, my fear is mostly between me and me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know that if I step out, like, my life isn't in danger, and I believe that some people actually have that. We've experienced it, right? Like, some people actually have that. Wow, if I actually speak up, if I show up fully expressed, if I show up a certain way, like, my actual life is in danger. So when I talk about like the difference from where you're at to where, like, you stepping out of your comfort zone and stepping out into this new field of possibility, when your life is actually in danger, you are less likely to do that.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, you just touched on my biggest fear actually. It's what's kept me quiet for so long was that I was afraid that if I really became myself, spoke out, shared my stories, that my life would be in danger. That like someone would like see me on the street or find me somewhere and just like just kill me because I was like a gay black man that was like outspoken or prominent or whatever the case may
Mm,
be. I think wow yeah I think hate crime against me is like my biggest fear, that like
mm,
that somehow that level of tragedy will come to me, whether it be through like, I'm not that afraid of the police, but I guess it's possible. Um, but more coming from like a level of like bigotry, and I think that's why I've worked so hard to want to change people's minds, because it makes me feel safer, that
mm,
that like, oh, if I can impact this person, then maybe I'm not really in as much danger as I think I am in. um
mm,
so it's something that's pretty difficult to live with, um that feeling of feeling unsafe in most places, and only being able to relate to safety as by how connected I am to the people that I'm around. Um, so yeah, so that's something for me to take responsibility for, that I don't think I've ever really been able to, or at least talked about before this. So, thank
mm,
you.
mm. Um, yeah, and I got that also, like, pulled something up for you. So I just want to be aware of that. And is there anything you want to share about what came up, or is there anything that you need here, right now?
Um, I mean, the sharing it was very was great. Yeah, thank you.
Um, my spidey sense wants to ask you if there is actually anything that you need, that you're just not
Hmm.
wanting to ask for.
Maybe an air hug. Because if we were together, that's probably what would happen next, right?
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
one, thanks for asking. Absolutely. If you're listening to this podcast, we got a little air hug going on. So if you really want to see the video version, clearly you can go over to YouTube for this.
Mm.
um, thanks for asking for that. I think what I also get sometimes is like it can actually be that easy, like to be heard, to be able to say what you need to, and also to get a hug. It's like,
Mm.
man, what a year that it's been for people to not be able to like do that, not be able to go see the people that they normally get hugs from and
Mm.
all that stuff. Like when you think about what you need, it might just be a hug.
Mm.
Go give people hugs. I think that's really, um, really valuable. So, and I get that you actually just now went past that point where you're like, yeah, just got to share it. That was good enough. And then like getting to share that you actually wanted like a hug in this moment, like
Mm.
awesome.
Yeah.
Um, wow. The are you cool if we like pivot and start moving towards our wrap up?
Yeah, what I was gonna say, what are you getting?
God, so much.
Mhm.
What am I getting? Um, hmm, I'm getting what it's like. Uh, I'm getting what it's like to be you a little bit more
Mm.
in this conversation, like getting to like see how you see things and how you experiencing things, and like getting to actually be so deep in connection with you that I get to experience what it's like to share your experience. So
Mm.
I think that's the big thing that I'm walking away with today.
I'm getting that when I am responsible for everything that shows up in my space, including my fear, that it can be transformative. Um, yeah.
Hmm. I don't know if I would have seen us getting to this point in this podcast.
Definitely
Uh,
didn't. Nope.
and that's what I love about this. I think I listen to a lot of stuff and it's like, this is the entry point, this is the exit point, these are the milestones, ask some questions and it's good. And I love that our conversations are actually transformative, which is really what we committed to having this podcast be all about was um, being willing to have this level of depth and intimacy in our relationship so that other people can get something for themselves as well.
Mm.
Um, this episode, responsibility and accountability. I know we could go for another 3 hours on this, and I'm really excited to continue this conversation in our next episode with an amazing author, the author of No More Mr. Nice Guy, and why that's important and why that's important to me is I am a recovering nice guy, and one of the biggest things that was in the way of me shifting away from that is taking responsibility and being
Mm.
accountable to myself and being accountable for, hey, no matter how I got here, I'm here. And I can either be victimized by it or I can start transforming my own shame, my own insecurities so that I can show up more powerfully in present. And some of that has to do exactly with what you shared, Jason, around um, being willing to share your fear as part of the
Mhm.
transformative process. And then by taking responsibility, and if we rewind that back to the beginning, one of these really cool things that you said was um, taking responsibility as access to freedom and how shame can be more of a prison, and you have to be willing to take a look at it and willing to take responsibility even for the fact that you have shame, but that that creates access to something that's totally new, something totally unique, something that's totally uniquely you, something that is uniquely me. But I gotta tell you, I'd much rather have the conversation with what's uniquely you than, the parts that we're trying to hide and,
Mm.
actually escape from. So, um, yeah, so just stay tuned. The week after this drops, that will be coming out as well. So if you've been listening to this conversation and you got something for yourself, please share it with us, or at least write it down, journal it out, put it next to your bed. Um, but share it with us. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Clubhouse. You can find us on YouTube, on any of the podcasts by searching "Gentlemen," the podcast. And Jason, I'm going to hand it to you to take us out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we definitely encourage you to go back and listen to all the episodes because they really build on each other. If you happen to come across this one first because you found us on Instagram or something like that, but I know that I always walk away with something new, and I think that anyone who listens to these episodes will find something for themselves. Next week, we're really excited to welcome Dr. Robert Glover, the author of No More Mr. Nice Guy. Um, and yeah, that was a really, really amazing conversation. So I'm super excited for everyone to hear that. And I've recommended that book to like literally 20 people. And we even had a guest, Samir, on last week who is reading it now, which was
Oh,
super
wow.
awesome to hear. So yeah, just talk about taking full responsibility for like how they were showing up in the world, and then to create a tool for other people to also get that level of responsibility is just like that's the dream. So we
Hmm.
look forward to seeing you next week, and thanks for tuning in.